Welcome. I'm Chris Harris. I'm the director of the Esther B. Clark School, which is a division of Children's Health Council. We are a non-public school, and I can assure you that I have lots of ADHD kids in my. We have 120 kids between our Palo Alto campus, which is back here, and in South Bay in San Jose. And they are all referred to us by the public school systems from as far north as Marin County, all the way down to San Benito County, when their district programs are unable to help these kids derive some educational benefit. Their eligibilities are ED and OHI usually, and OHI often includes ADHD. So hopefully I know a little bit about this subject. So a little bit about Children's Health Council. We're a nonprofit organization providing education and mental health services. You're at the main campus. Our other one is in South Bay in San Jose. We just opened it up a couple of years ago. Here are all the things we're trying to accomplish. We want kids to grow up healthy, understand themselves better, and actually have hope for their futures. And a lot of the kids that we deal with here have lost that hope, including some of the kids we'll talk about today. I'm not going to read this stuff to you. We're going to go ripping through this. If you have any questions, you can certainly ask me at the end. I know you're here for content, not for marketing. Just to give you an idea, we believe in all of those: metacognition, academic, mental health and wellness, and physical development, as I'm sure you all do. That's what creates the healthiest kind of youngsters. This organization focuses on just the four types that you see in front of you: ADHD, learning differences, anxiety, depression, and autism. And we don't profess to know or have experts outside of those areas. This constitutes a considerable percentage of kids who have challenges, but it's certainly not all of them, and we don't expand beyond that. So the four divisions we have are the clinical services, and that's our outpatient clinics. We have a Medi-Cal clinic at both campuses, a private pay clinic here. We are reaching out into East Palo Alto to give them some mental health support as well through that division. Our community connections, this is part of that, professional education, parent education we do. You'll see on your chair something called EdRev Expo, which is a really kind of cool day coming up on May 4th. It's at now Oracle Park. You'll see it's AT&T Park there. So that's probably more familiar. It's a full day family celebration of kids with challenges and who are neurotypically different. The parents get to have the exposure to hundreds of exhibitors showing the resources all over the Bay Area. The kids get to go out in the playground, out in the field, and the batting cages. Once in a while, there's even a San Francisco Giant who shows up. So it's kind of a fun day. It's supposed to be a really celebratory day for these youngsters. Sand Hill School, which is across the hall, works with our LD and AD, and also our ADHD population, but primarily kids with learning disabilities. And then there's my school, which is the Therapeutic Day School, for kids with ED and OHI who are unable to be in their districts right now. So we are open to everybody without discrimination. And who am I? I've been around for quite a few years here. At the Esther B. Clark School, when I started, we had 32 kids, and we had a mishmash of all kinds of youngsters. And as we got more focused, we got better at what we do. So the clinical presentations of our kids: a lot of anxiety, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, depression, ADHD, bipolar, oppositional defiant disorder, and you'll see ADHD. So they're included here. And like I said, we're working with kids all the way from Marin to San Benito County. So I figure you're here because you have ADHD kids. How many have only one and be lucky ducks? No, I didn't figure that. How many have like more than 4? Good. And are you in special ed? Regular ed. Okay. And do you know special ed? And do you know whether or not these youngsters are actually diagnosed? They have a diagnosis of ADHD. Okay. Some of them do. Okay. So we've learned a lot about ADHD, and you can see that there's a lot of D's that are involved. it's kind of interesting to me that that the hyperactive, the H is still in it, because not all kids who have attentional challenges are hyperactive. Okay, we know that for a fact. In fact, I'll show you coming up a couple of slides on that. But let me assure you that I could create an environment that would make you all very inattentive. I could absolutely do that without any problem at all. And I think you know that the teacher has a power to actually create attentional issues, okay? What we have to do as teachers is very difficult, especially at the middle school level, because their need for satiation and to be gratified and to be entertained is constant, and it's every day, right? I don't have to tell you folks that. When we talk about true ADHD, it's really important to understand this is a brain-based disorder, and it's one that is actually lifelong. It does not actually go away. It can be suppressed and it can be effectively managed, but the neurological basis of ADHD is persistent. And so their predisposition for having attentional challenges will probably exist their entire life. Most of the time, at least what we've found when we work with our kids, is that it's comorbid. And in fact, many of the conditions that I showed you that we work with, the clinical presentations there, will necessarily impact a youngster's ability to attend, right? If you're depressed, if you're anxious, you probably aren't in the moment and you aren't attending to the right thing at the right time. You're perseverating on some thought that either is in the future or the past. So we see, so a lot of the attentional disorders that we see that could be, that were actually initially identified as ADHD were actually comorbid or part of a more serious mental health condition. So we oftentimes see the behaviors of these youngsters as misperceiving as they're willful, and one of the reasons, and malicious, and one of the reasons we see that is because they repeat the same infractions. How many of you experienced that? I thought I told you already like 5 times, I can't have you get up in the middle of class and wander around, or I can't have you drumming the pencil really loudly on your desk. It's disruptive to everybody else, right? So the problem is, and if you think about this, the reason that exists is because ADHD kids live in the moment, and only in the moment. Now I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit more, because moments can be very misleading, and we think of moments as a short period of time. But actually in ADHD we see that kids can actually attend to something they are very stimulated and passionate about for a longer period of time, which gives us the belief that you're actually manipulating the situation and you're not interested, and therefore you could be attending if you wanted to. Okay, everybody's nodding. So let me also say that in this discussion we're going to have this afternoon, I have no secret answers for you, okay? They are annoying. I've been in this field since I was 23 and I'm now 64, and they're still annoying, okay? So no matter how much we've learned about their their neurology and their makeup, they still exhibit annoying behavior. So I'm sorry if you came here hoping that tomorrow would be a much better day for your ADHD kids. Next point is about satiation, and these kids are really hard to satiate for any long period of time unless they're instantly gratified. So a lot of questions, or some questions I get sometimes is, well, how come they can play video games for so long? So why do you think? Because they're satiated, they're gratified very often, okay? Somebody's, either they've killed off somebody, a car, they've gotten rid of the monster, you know, something has happened that gives them that instant gratification, and the more they play that game, the more the better they get, the more they're getting gratified, okay? So, and I want you to think of a video game too, when they're doing that and getting gratified, as that moment. It's still that moment in time, okay? And you'll know that because when you transition them from that activity to a less preferred one, all of a sudden they won't be able to attend very well, right? Okay, so they confuse parents and professionals because, in fact, their moments can be long, can vary in time quite a bit. It can be from 5 seconds, and you wonder, you know, why aren't you attending, to a good 20 minutes on a task that they happen to be passionate about. To give you an idea, an admitted ADHD person is Shaun White. How many people of you have heard of Shaun White, the Olympic snowboarder, right? Okay, so I can assure you that he attended to practicing snowboarding for considerable lengths of time, okay? And he's a diagnosed ADHD, but what happens is his moment of being on that snowboard is giving him instant gratification, okay? He's being actually satiated. When we have to deliver a physics lesson to somebody who's absolutely not interested in physics lessons, we're not satiating them, okay? And that's why their attention wanes. It's actually, and I think it's important here to understand that ADHD kids, the true ADHD kids, can't attend to certain things. They cannot, okay? They're just wired in a way that they cannot do it. What is difficult for those of you in middle school or high school, is that basically what I've got, is they've learned that that is a reason. They can give that as a reason, and so then they tie in the won't, okay? So it's very hard to tell what they can't do and what they won't do, okay? But we have to go on the premise that when they have a diagnosis, a true diagnosis of ADHD, there is a can't component to their ability to attend. Okay, there really is a can't. They're not getting enough serotonin and up into their heads. All right, these kids typically last planning, they're reactive, and then they're defensive when they're given feedback. They can be very defensive. They can think that you don't understand their intent, and therefore they get defensive about what their intent is. Now, many ADHD kids, because they're not willfully and maliciously trying to be disruptive, their intent is actually positive, even if they screw up. And so if we focus on their intent, we actually push them into a defensive mode. Lastly, it's really important that most ADHD kids can't accomplish what they want to do because they can't attend long enough. Okay, Shaun White's an exception. I don't know how he overcame that, but he wasn't in school, for one thing. He was probably on the slopes, right? So he was getting a lot of physical activity as well as getting satiated by something he had passion about. But it is very hard to have kids in a classroom for a long period of time. We're going to talk about mental energy and allocation of mental energy in just a few minutes. It's very inconsistent and it can vary a lot. And I'll try to give you some examples that you might hopefully will resonate with you. Saliency is, it's not that these kids don't pay attention, they actually don't pay attention to the right thing at the right time. Okay, so they can attend, and that's a myth that they can't attend. It's really they can attend, and I'm going to say, quite frankly, they won't attend to things that they don't find passionate, interesting, stimulating, and gratifying. Okay, that's going to be a problem that they're going to have. The ones who get referred to me have terrible lack of impulse control, and they are doing things that have caused them to get into a lot of trouble repeatedly, and the assumption or the conclusion that the administrators in the school have drawn is this youngster doesn't care and has decided not to be cooperative and to follow school rules, and they come to me. There's a disproportionately high intolerance for being settled and focused for an extended period of time. And these are things that actually, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but to give you a preview, when the task is perceived as dull, mundane, or boring, like chores at home, like homework, like those kind of things, the attention deficit is likely to exacerbate, okay? That's just part of what that syndrome is. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for the kids, and we'll talk about that, but I'm just trying to say that genuinely it is more difficult for kids to do the tasks that we think are routine because it doesn't gratify, it doesn't satiate them, and therefore they're less likely to attend to them the way they do. You probably heard from parents that the kids forget to take out the trash. They don't do a good job taking out the trash. They don't clean their room. They don't make their bed. They don't put on, get their clothes out on time. All of these kind of things because the kids are actually not very interested in doing it, and then they don't attend to it. And then they get harassed, and then they become defensive. Okay, so this is kind of a cycle that they get into which is counterproductive to them and very frustrating for parents and for professionals, obviously. So these are the three types right now. I can tell you right now that we are all mainly inattentive when we choose to be. 10 minutes of 5, you guys are tough, because that's not usually a high alert time. So ADHD and attentive types kind of take over around 4:30 to 6, right around this workshop time. So don't worry, I won't diagnose you. That's okay. It's all right. It's all right if you do. I actually teach at the university, the San Jose State University, and they give me a 4 o'clock class, and the teachers come in and they're like, you can just tell they've had a full day already, and now they have to listen to volumes of material from me. Mainly impulsive and hyperactive, those are the kids you'll easily identify. And here's the interesting thing, and I find this to be fascinating. And then there's 3, the combined. Well, if you're impulsive and hyperactive, you can't possibly be attentive, right? So why do you have a combined? I mean, if it's either you're inattentive and passive, or you're hyperactive and impulsive, right? I don't know how they came up with combined, because those impulsive kids running around your classroom or fidgeting or playing with something in their desk are certainly not attentive, right? One of the things I want to emphasize today, even though this talk is about ADHD, is I need us to all recognize the fact that attentional issues are oftentimes, in fact, I'm going to say more often than not, associated with another kind of condition, and those are on the board. So anxiety, which we see a lot of, where kids are, especially your inattentive type of ADHD kids, are usually perseverating about how awful something's going to happen in the future, the catastrophe that waits for them around the corner. It could be in your class in the end of the unit test that they're going to take, and they've just catastrophized it. We also see boredom. I mean, 2E, everybody familiar with 2E? Twice exceptional, right? Have you heard about that? So these are the kids with IQs in the superior range, and they also have language processing problems. So they are easily bored intellectually, even if they have trouble outputting in a way that shows how much they actually know. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So when you're teaching grade level curriculum at a pace that is sort of in the middle of for the grade development, they truly are bored. Okay, they are not stimulated enough. Cognitive variances, and I want to emphasize these two because we see at ABC tremendous amounts of these two issues being interfering and huge obstacles for kids to attend. Processing speed and working memory. And to be very quick about this, processing speed is if I talk this fast and I ask you to keep up with me and you're supposed to memorize whatever you're supposed to do, I'm putting a lot of pressure on your processing speed and your working memory. Oh, and incidentally, don't write it all down, just try to remember it all, okay? So a normal pace of conversation for a lot of these kids is too fast, and then there's too much. And so when the processing speed can't keep up with the lecture or the task at hand, and when the working memory becomes overloaded, you will see kids not be able to attend. And it's pretty understandable. If you've been in a class where you don't understand or can't keep up with what's going on, what do? You try to attend, but you can't. It becomes very fragmented, and pretty soon people just kind of give up and decide, okay, I'm going to think about what Friday night might be. It's going to be a lot more enjoyable than what I'm doing now. Depression is the next one, and mood dysregulation, and these kids are really shut down. They cannot attend. It is actually a neurological condition. They can't attend at all. They are in a state of being unable to process information correctly at all. And a lot of this is, of course, around perception too, but they're really basically not being able to attend to what the task is at hand. And the last one is executive functioning, which is really a fascinating part. There's lots of components to executive functioning. It's worth its own workshop to actually understand all the components, but attentional control is absolutely one of the executive functionings, okay? And so those kids who have executive functioning problems are not usually identified as being ADD or ADHD. They are usually, if they're under executive functioning, people believe they just have study skill problems, but it goes far beyond that if you really understand executive functioning. We're looking at that really hard here because it's a conglomerate of both of actually scholastic behavioral and emotional skills that don't come together to keep up with the level of the curriculum. Yes?
I don't see sleep disorders in the article recently.
Yes, and yeah. Most all psychopathologies, and when kids do have that, or even nutritional deficiencies, they're not going to be able to attend well. If their basic psychological needs aren't met, and physiological needs aren't met, you're right, absolutely, that's going to be another factor. So just be careful, because a lot of the symptoms, in fact, most of the symptoms can actually be seen in kids with these. Now, the difference is that it's chronic. With true ADHD, it's going to be chronic. It is going to interfere with things that they actually want to do, okay? And it's persistent across many domains. Now, I have had a number of situations. I'm affectionately called the IEP king around here because I do about 200 a year. So one of the things that we see in this is the reporting is by the professional who's having the most problems with it. So let's just take, for example, if you're, anybody an English teacher here? I love you guys, but if you're an English teacher, I'm going to pick on you just for a second, okay? So a lot of our kids have learning challenges in writing, in expressive writing, okay? So they don't do it, and they don't attend to it very well. And the teacher who is making the referral is concerned about the youngster's ability to attend. So that goes up to the assessment, and the assessment is kind of looked at, and the interview is done with the youngster who says, I'm not very good at English, and the observer comes into the English class, and by golly, that kid's not attending. And so the eligibility for OHI and ADHD is met. But nobody went to the PE teacher. Nobody talked to the recess monitor to see if the youngster was actually playing games and staying on track. Nobody went to the social studies teacher where he's actually getting an A. Okay, so be very careful, and this is one of the points is to be ADHD, this has to be across multiple domains, including those domains of interest. Okay, that's what really ADHD is. If it's something else, if it's selective, it is selective. And you can be on it, and I'll be honest with you, that's a won't, not a can't. Okay, that's a I'm not interested in this. I'm not as interested. Now, I can talk about that as a parent, because my daughter, my youngest daughter, who I'm proud to say is now a very well-functioning adult, but in high school, the way she dealt with high school is if she liked the class and liked the professor, she got an A without any problem, and if she didn't like the class or didn't like the professor, she got an F. No matter how much I talked to her about how that could sabotage her, right? But there was a label put on her that she must have an attention deficit disorder because the classes that she didn't do well in, she didn't attend to, okay? But she didn't have it. She made a decision. I'm not going to do this. So some of your kids that you may think are neurologically impaired may in fact not be. And what is a very easy way to find it out, just check out with your colleagues. Check with the PE teacher, check with the social studies teacher, check with the science teacher. Now, if they have the same report that you experience in your classroom, then it's more likely to be. But if they give you a very different report, that's not ADHD. Okay, that's not. So executive, just very quickly, I'm not going to spend much time on this because this is actually more, yeah.
So how is that different than say being able to return to the video? Like where's the line that gets drawn between they were able to attend in PE, which is a
highly stimulated, right? Highly stimulating activity.
But they couldn't in English, math, social studies.
Okay, so English, math, and social studies. Here's the difference. If they're able to be, and this is that's a really good question, incidentally. So if they're motorically involved and they have the motor part of it, like the hyperactive, they're more likely to be able to attend. If they're sitting passively, okay, then you're going to see that ADHD come. And if the construction of the class in social studies and science and math and English are all the same, like everybody's sitting for 50 minutes, and you get the same report, that's actually legitimate, okay? And so the kids are going to do better if they're physically involved, and they're not going to do as well if they're passive, okay? And one of the things we saw was their inability to be settled in the seat, and parents report that all the time. They're fine when they play and terrible at the dinner table, terrible when we get in the car and have to take a 2-hour drive. See the difference? Like there's a motoric release that needs to happen. We're going to get to that. Okay, so I just want to point out that you can see that actually a lot of this has to do with attention. You know, the idea of actually organizing and getting yourself ready to do a project. This is executive functioning, the activation, initiating a task, sustaining focus, and regulating your alertness. Okay, all of those are very, very much associated with attention, with the issue of attention, and yet, as you can see here, that is it's closely affiliated with executive functioning, and I'm not going to spend any more time on that. It's a fascinating area to go. We are giving professional workshops on executive functioning, but it's not tonight. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 different components of attention. Mental energy control, registration controls, and retrieval controls. This is a really deep dive into attention, but I think it's worth our time to do it because what you're going to be able to do, I hope, is be able to recognize exactly what part of the attention they're really struggling with after we get done with this. It's just, instead of calling this thing attention, we're going to divide it into sort of 3 compartments, and then I'm hoping you're going to be able to identify or in your head think of your students and where they're having the greatest amount of challenge attending. All right, so we're going to do a car analogy, and you're all, I know this isn't probably a real, I'm not a car guy either, but here's what I want you to think about. So I want you to think of your students as having different kinds of engines, different kinds of transmissions, different kinds of maximum speeds that they can work with. Everybody seeing, now let's see if you can make the association. What am I talking about when I talk about automatic versus manual transmissions? Anybody know? What part of the brain am I talking about? Processing? Front load, the front lobes, and we're specifically talking about processing speed there, right? Instead of automatically switching into higher gears and fast, you have to think about it, and you've got to shift down. How about maximum speed? Again, that's processing speed, right? Okay? And then power versus manual steering. How much effort does it take to attend, to actually drive the vehicle? Okay, and if any of you have ever driven a 1960 vehicle, you know you have to work much harder at driving it than you do today. All right, so the key is that these kids actually can get to the destination, all right? But how much fuel gets consumed, how fast they get there, and how much work they have to do to get there is going to vary tremendously. And with the kids' attention deficit disorder, they're going to struggle a lot more. They're going to need accommodations and both from the instructional viewpoint and from a student response viewpoint. We're going to get to that, and we're going to be very specific and spend some time on that. But I want you to understand that these kids, okay, most of them have the ability to get to the targeted outcome, but they're not the V8 engines on automatic transmission going at 120 miles an hour, okay? They are not, okay? But so understand that their way of getting to that destination is going to be different, is going to have a different look than the kids who are neurotypical and can function very well in your classrooms. All right, so here's the first one, which is probably, I think, the most important one to have some grasp on. So there are four levels of mental energy controls. The first one is sustainability of alertness. So what we see with the well-intentioned ADHD kids is they'll come into your class and they're determined that they're going to try to listen to you, okay? Now, what I want you to understand is in that first 10 minutes, they actually use up their fuel. That's it. They've run out of fuel and then they fall apart. So they're hyper-focused, but in that hyper-focus, they've had to do an awful lot of effort in order to maintain that level of attention that they know they have to apply in order to stay with your class, okay? So in a sense, one of the things that's happening to them in that first 10 minutes is they're paying attention to paying attention. Okay, feet on the floor, look straight ahead, process it all, take the notes as much as I can, and they're exhausting themselves. Okay, they literally are exhausting their thresholds of attention. And about 20 minutes into it, you're going to see the fidgeting, you're going to see the restlessness, you're going to see the moving around, you're going to see the head down on the desk, you're going to see the inattentive behavior come. And that is a sign, honestly, folks, they have given you everything they got. They don't have any more. They need a break, and we're going to talk about breaks in this second. The level of arousal, how many of you have 8 o'clock classes with 12-year-olds or over? Okay, good luck. Because their level of arousal at 8 o'clock, their biological readiness to be taught is absolutely not ready at all. In fact, there was a bill, I know it got turned down, but there was some real thought about this in California when they said we need to move high school start times back to at least 9 o'clock. Because those 8 o'clock classes are not, they don't work for the ADHD kids, but they're not working for a lot of kids because their level of arousal and mental alertness at that level is just not where it needs to be. And then how many of you have the 2:30 to 3:30 final period of the day class, right? Done. They're done. They're way done, okay? And they're more likely to have the behavioral problems and the fidgeting at the end of the day. So their levels of arousal are, they can be either too high in the middle of the day, or when they get off the cab, they can be all too fired up, or they can be too low. How many of you work with zones of regulation? Anybody work with zones of regulation? So they're coming into your class either blue or red. Blue or red, which is not a teachable, this is actually not a teachable level. And so one of the things I know, one of the things that we do when the kids get there is we get everybody to do laps, walk laps. Not a lot of exercise, but walk laps vigorously. It gets the low people up and it gets the high people down a little bit. Okay? And you're doing something motoric. And then there's the performance consistency. So let's do a little scenario and tell me what you would do. So how many of you have ever driven east on I-580 towards Stockton over the Altamont Pass? Everybody done that? If you haven't, I'll give you another example. Well, okay, so let me just say, if you're driving east on 580 and you get past Livermore, you have to get all the way to Tracy before you get a gas station, okay? And the traffic is slow, okay? It gets oftentimes bottled up. So this is a real life story that happened to me, and I want to see what you would do. So the last exit before the Altamont Pass, I'm 50 yards past it, and I look down at the gas tank and I go, oh my God, it's on E. And it's 15 miles to the next gas station. So you have a choice, okay? What do? Do you press down the gas pedal and go as fast as you possibly can over the Altamont Pass to get to the gas station as fast as you possibly can before you run out? Or do you ease up on your gas pedal and try to get up to the top of the hill and coast down to Tracy so that you can get the gas? How many people would press the pedal to the metal? All of you would let go, right? Okay, so now you understand what hypo is. That's just not enough energy to sustain, okay, in the classroom. You've let go of the pedal, and now you're just barely squeaking by, and that's what these kids are making a choice. They're either pushing the pedal to the metal in order to stay with you, or they're letting up on the gas pedal and hoping that they can get through the rest of your period. Okay, that's what mental alertness is. That's what the mental effortness is. And that's why you see such performance inconsistency, because they're constantly wondering how they're going to get through your class. Now, if you're paying attention, like how am I going to pay attention, then you're not paying attention. Right? If you're thinking about all the things that people have told them about what they need to do to pay attention, then you can't listen to the content. It's too much. All right, next part is registration. So this is kind of an interesting thing, and I'm going to try to make it as straightforward as I can so it doesn't get too convoluted here. So these are factors that influence how well a youngster attends on a functional and purposeful basis. In other words, are they really able to take in the information that you want them to take in, okay? So the first thing is, if they're quasi paying attention, the depth of their registration of new information isn't going to actually be deep enough or thorough enough for them to actually put into their short term, or what we call the working memory. So it's actually not usable for them, okay? These are the kids who kind of look at you and say, oh yeah, I know what you're saying. Yep, I get it. But they don't get it, okay? Because if you actually ask them beyond, do you get it? Yeah, I get it. They wouldn't be able to tell you actually what they do. But they've looked like they've attended. But the depth of their registration and their ability to choose the most important components to, in fact, register is not accurate, okay? Either they've tried to take it all in and they're overloaded and now they're done, or they haven't chosen the right thing. They haven't really focused on things like main idea. They focused on some minute detail, which in that detail, they probably went off on a tangent in their own heads. That reminded them of this, which reminded them of that, and then they're off here and you're over here. They have difficulty activating prior knowledge. So this is a problem when it actually is a result of the depth. So when you want them to pull up previous concepts, unless they've registered those into memory, they actually can't utilize them to integrate with the new knowledge you're giving them, because they weren't listening to the previous knowledge well enough, even if they're listening to today. Okay? Now this is particularly true when you get to middle school and high school, when it's really important that kids be able to retrieve previous information and integrate it and synthesize it with new information that you're giving them. And because they didn't register it deeply enough, they're unable to do that. Okay? So I kind of mentioned the intentional focus. So you're focusing on what is happening now, what you're doing, not the thought that you stimulate when you had some vocabulary word or you gave some anecdote and they're now relating it to their life that happened 10 years ago. Okay? And then, and this is I think this is more important than most people grant. If they're not satiated, if they don't feel some sense of gratification about sticking with you and being in your class, and I don't mean you as people, they like you as people, but what you're conveying to them is not stimulating, then they're not going to feel satiated. And when they don't feel satiated, they're not really going to pay as much attention because they're not interested in the subject. Okay, it's boring to them. And that's a real factor. I'm not going to minimize that. And so what happens is, it's pretty easy. If you don't feel satiated, you're not really going to attend. And if you're not going to really attend, you're not going to register new information, and then you're not going to be able to access it. Okay? And then you're not listening. You're not paying attention. Okay? So that's the input. Now the output. So these kids, like I said, are reactive. They don't plan. They kind of just jump into things because they want to get them done really quickly while they've got a little energy left. So they don't preview. They do not think about what the outcome is supposed to look like. They never stop and think, now what do you think Mrs. Smith wants me to, how do you think Mrs. Smith wants me to present this? What's this final project? What's this final paper going to look like? They don't think about that. These are kids who, I don't know if you've had them, you hand out the paper and they start doing it. They don't wait for the directions. The reason they do that is A, they're almost out of gas, and B, they're trying to hurry through. This is pushing the pedal down, okay? I got to get done before I run out of fuel here. But it may not follow the directions. You put the paper down, they go, I got to do the paper, got to do the paper, got to do the paper. Okay? Don't, right. Don't turn the paper over, right. So then you've got those, and then you have the initiation, getting started, okay? I mean, and I don't do well with this either. So you put a blank piece of paper in front of them and they're going to be stuck, okay? They are going to be stuck. I get stuck. I have a lot of empathy when people put blank papers down. I don't like that either. They're pacing and they're self-monitoring, and they're willing to, are also ingredients of this previewing. It's the same thing. So their pacing is wrong because either, again, let's go back to the gas pedal. They're either pushing the pedal to the metal, trying to get it done quickly, and they're not attending to all the components that you want them to, or they're backing out that pedal and they're not really focused and keeping a rhythm to their work that allows them to pursue it to completion. Okay, they're not actually getting that far. And then the idea of having to go back and review it again is something that they can't even tolerate. Okay, that's way too much mental energy and needed attention. So it's done and it's done, right? How many of you, most of you have that, right? If it's done, it's done. Yep.
Is it done and done, like, for often in my classroom, it's like, you review it the next day, but that seems to end up being a problem too. It's like,
Yeah.
well, we took care of that.
Well, I did that yesterday. Yeah, this is a new moment. So whatever I did yesterday has actually a little varying to, because this is a different moment now. In the moment, kids, right? So this being associated with that is actually not a good, that's something that ADD kids have a lot of trouble with. All right. I'm going to give you a choice here. So you have the slides, right? So what you might do, we're not going to do it right now, but what you might do is, that particularly with a youngster that you're having difficulty with, is do your own kind of assessment on really how pervasive the attentional issue is. So now that you've done these exercises, take a look at what we've talked about, okay, especially the last three, and ask your colleagues how they do with some of those if you describe that. And see if you come up with the same areas of attention where they're particularly struggling, okay? That's going to help you focus some strategies on interventions which we're just about to get into. But instead of saying, well, they don't attend, okay, which is like saying a California wine, okay? There's lots of different California wines in case you didn't know, which I know you do. Everybody knows that. Okay, it's the same thing here in attention. Attention isn't one thing, it's made up of lots of different components as you can dig down into those details, your interventions are going to be a little bit more effective. Okay, now like I said, it's not a panacea, it's not going to fix the situation, but it may mitigate some of the frequency and the intensity of the inattentiveness that you see. Yeah.
So would you also add then first period of the day?
Yes, yeah, you could. Yeah, you can do it as, I took those, I was assuming that one of them's an early class and one of them's a late class, but change it to however you need to, okay? You can also use time on the y-axis if that helps. And a lot of times that's the way functional assessments do. They'll take a look at the time instead of the period. Yeah.
I have a student who focuses on like any type of activity that requires motor.
Okay.
And then the opposite
Yeah.
occurs when he needs to sit.
Yeah.
So if I have this kind of student, is he ADHD?
So there is this restlessness if they have to hold the same position a long time, which would actually qualify as it being ADHD. Okay. Now, or at least as a genuine attentional challenge. I don't know if that kid is sitting there anxious about what's going to happen in the future, feeling hopeless about their own future and they're actually depressed, or whether or not there's just, I can't sit in this, I can't sit and I cannot listen to you. I can't do it for as long as you're asking me to, okay? And there's a real difference between all of that. But yes, you could actually make, if they're terrible here and they're better here, then that's something else. Now watch the transition, because that usually is a sign too that they really don't transition well. They will be protesting about going back in because they're being satiated and gratified by running around, and now you're telling them to come in and sit down and read a quiet book, okay? And they may be the last person in line. All right. So the breakdowns, when are they going to happen? Later in the day it gets, or the earlier, or the first period. The task complexity, if it demands a high level of material and time management, okay, that's going to be a hardship. So your mission projects, I know you're not fourth grade teachers, but mission projects are, well, if you've seen mission projects, they're usually done by the parent, right? Because the cognitive demand on a fourth grader is not going to give you the mission that you want. They haven't had enough physical release. Incidentally, and I might as well throw this in right now, it is a really lousy idea to use as a punishment. You may not go out to recess at all. That will kill you, okay? You will be sabotaging the rest of your day. Not to say that there aren't consequences for this, but don't use that one. Too high or too low levels of stimulation. So, for example, you will see some kids respond quite significantly to that, to this, okay? right? Is this a little more harsh than something like this, which is much more calming, okay? If the environment is conducive to being calm, the ADHD kids are more likely to be able to do that for a longer time. If the environment is conducive to a lot of motoric movement, but it's sort of unstructured at all, then you're going to have problems with that, with them being able to manage themselves in that much stimulation, okay? So if you have a classroom of 40 and you have 6 stations and you're expecting kids to self-monitor and get to each station, that's not something that an ADHD kid is going to do very well with, I can assure you. They'll want to, they'll want to because they actually are kind of excited that they get to move around to different stations and do something that's visual motor, but they can't manage the amount of stimulation that that's creating in that moment, okay? So there's an asset to it, but then there's a liability. Unpredictability, they don't do that, and too long a prolonged delay of gratification and reinforcement, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But these are more likely when you're going to see breakdowns, and then you're going to see more oppositional defiant behavior and that defensive stuff that we talked about earlier. Yeah.
Just going back to your comment about the being able to get the environmental piece with the lighting and all of that. We have a flex room. One of our classes is in the flex space. We've got some desks that are just individualized and the bouncy balls and whatnot. And of course, it feels like some of our students who are on that edge, it works right now. That you see them, they're doing this.
But their eyes are there, they're trying.
And then there's just one, just doesn't fit into this darn equation of our beautiful flex room, who likes to run across the room and then slide on his belly and go over the ball. And it's like, this is what we said, this is how we're not using these tools. Let's remind you how we are using these tools. So I'm assuming that
there are limitations and parameters to using accommodations. We'll get to that. Yep, we will. And I mean, we have the same thing. So everybody hear that comment of this bouncy balls and trying to get the kids settled and making them more physically comfortable, because there's a sensory component to ADHD. So we also provide a toolbox of fidgets. And we have all kinds of different fidgets, and the kids have what they call a toolbox in their desk. So they have this group of fidgets. Now, the problem is that some of the fidgets are distracting while others focus them, okay? And we actually start with the same toolbox and eliminate the ones that are distracting, and they keep the ones that are focusing on them, okay? And that makes a difference. It really does make a difference. And it's trial by error. I mean, we have to do it. But eventually there is some kind of fidget or something that they can use motorically that isn't disruptive, and the kids can keep it, and that actually helps them improve their attention to the task. Yeah.
When you're doing that trial and error process for figuring out which fidget works best for them, do you have a good way of maybe doing that outside of like simulating a classroom scenario? Because of course that trial and error, when there's 7 errors in a row, the rest of my class.
Yeah, right, yes, yeah. So we actually, see, as a non-public school, I do have privileges that other people don't. So we do this right off the bat, right in August. By Labor Day, we know what's working and what doesn't work, okay? And so we're not trying to drill them with a lot of content. I'm still trying to assimilate them into a classroom and function a little bit. So that's one of the functional things we look at. So we do it right off the bat. Yeah, here it is. We're going to watch you. And again, I feel a little privileged here, but our classrooms are staffed by a special education teacher, a behaviorist, and a classroom assistant with 12. So we can do that. We can actually observe what aids kids and facilitates their attention and what is causing a distraction. If you're a single teacher and you have 30 kids, I'm empathic with you. That would be a much more challenging task. So you take the most observable ones, right? The kids who are absolutely, are not paying attention, and what's the fidgets they've got at that point in time. All right, why do we talk about ADHD? Because, and I'm not going to go into everything, but there's a lot of negative implications for kids who really don't learn how to manage their ADHD. And incidentally, this is notice what I said is if they cannot manage their ADHD, you are the facilitator to help them be able to manage their own ADHD. They're going to have to be able to do that, because as long as they depend on somebody else, they won't be able to manage it when they get to adolescence. And these are the kids who didn't learn how to do it, okay? 46% of them are expelled and 35% drop out, okay? Substance abuse becomes a higher thing. And it's a 2 times the risk, and it isn't associated with taking, incidentally, the medication for ADHD, but I know that's a fear. All right, best practices. Okay, for your true ADHD kids, okay, this is a brain-based disorder, and so a medical diagnosis is absolutely necessary. Okay, the diagnostic assessments that have been achieved by psychiatry with ADHD have improved tremendously. It's still somewhat subjective, obviously, but the improvement in understanding what is true ADHD as opposed to another psychopathology where attention is affected, and the medications that they can provide for kids with true ADHD has exponentially improved since I was actually teaching in the 80s when it was just getting started. Parents actually need not to be afraid of medication. Glenn Elliott, who is our medical director here and a very renowned psychiatrist, does a whole thing on medication for parents who have a lot of trepidations about medication. Now, in a comorbid situation, okay, and this may be some of the issues that your parents have, where you're treating both anxiety and ADHD, there can be counterproductive medications that are, when combined, have a negative impact on youngsters, okay? But pure ADHD medications are actually quite safe and can be truly quite effective as well for a short period of time. Hopefully during the hours of your class. And incidentally, one of the reasons and we know that parents are oftentimes the triage in terms of all the services. So many of the medications have about a 5.5, 6 hour longevity. So when they go home, they are coming off the medication, okay? And there's something called, everybody heard about the rebound effect? So everything that's didn't happen between 9 and 3 happens between 3:30 and 4:30 and drives parents absolutely crazy. And quite an intensive thing. Medications have been improved to mitigate the rebound effect, but if you picture this, the parent goes into the psychiatrist and says, my life is miserable. Do something, help me, okay? And then there's some change, even though you're having a lot more success. So that's one of the things that happens, unfortunately. A functional behavior assessment, we really advise that because there are kids who don't attend purposely. They are not, there is behavior around attention. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to delineate between the kids who are choosing not to attend and choosing and actually are more oppositional and defiant and disruptive than the kids who don't intend to be disruptive because they can't attend. There is a very clear difference between, and a functional behavior assessment will be able to, in fact, weed those out a little bit better. Yeah.
How do you get, I know being a special ed teacher, I can ask my psychologist to do an FBA, but a lot of them will say, I don't know, do you know how many words they are? It's so much paperwork, we're not getting out of this, blah, 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 blah. So
again,
is something you just keep pressing, like, let's give it a try, see what happens, or is it?
So there's 2 levels here, and most psychologists know this, so I'm just going to say this to you, but so there's a functional assessment or analysis assessment, an FAA, that is very formal and very long and very complex and paper driven, okay? And then there's a functional behavior assessment which can be considerably shorter and considerably more informal, okay? Because in this, you're just trying to find the function of the behavior, okay? So if it doesn't require all the time and effort and data collection that an FAA does, okay? And you might tell your psych, I'm not looking for an FAA, and I'm not looking for a BIP. I'm looking for an FBA and a behavior support plan so I can, help this youngster manage better.
I know we do the FBAs to help with it.
Yes, right, yep. And then the coordination of a consistent positive behavior teaching plan, this link between home and school. I can't emphasize this enough, and one of the struggles we have at EBC is actually convincing our parents to work collaboratively with us, but when they do, the results are exponentially better, because the kids we deal with are pretty smart, and they know if they can split between school and home, or split between parents, or even split between our staffs, that they can get away with a lot of stuff. And the problem with not collaborating with home is they will learn how to behave in your class, and they won't generalize it to any other class, and they certainly won't generalize it to home. Okay, and now you've created Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You get Dr. Jekyll, which is nice, but Mr. Hyde appears as soon as they leave your class. Okay, and that's not self-discipline, and that's not self-management. Okay, it's actually playing you. It's playing you. Environment that limits stimulation and emphasizes routines and clear procedures, really important. These kids are not, they may think they love surprises, but they actually don't do well with them at all. They do much better with routine, much better with clear. So we have, I mean, I'm sure most of you do this, we have the schedule out every day. We review it every day. We review it several times every day, okay? The behavior plan has predetermined incentives and consequences. It's all preloaded, which has advantage in also saying, look, we taught you this system. Okay, this is a system thing. This isn't me. This isn't personal. This is what you do. When you do this, when you do A, you get incentive B. When you do C, you get consequence D. This is very clear, and we keep repeating it. And I think the hardest part is you can set that plan up, but implementing it, you got to do it every single time, especially at the front end. It has to be very consistently enforced. This is why when we work with parents, and we at EBC, it is mandated that parents have to work with our behavior specialists and meet with them once a month, and they have to come to family therapy once a week. They have no choice. They do not get admission into the program unless they are willing to do that. So we actually force them into a collaborative state. But if you can do it and gender your parents to understand the importance of that, you will mitigate a lot of the intensity of symptoms of ADHD. All right, now let's go to the second bottom one. Predeterminate time breaks and ensuring the student is physically as comfortable in the classroom. Okay, even with the accommodations that you're making environmentally in your classroom, these kids are going to actually run out, and they're going to run out of energy. So one of the things we teach them is A, self-recognition, and then B, how to take care of that, how to do some self-care. So there are physical symptoms that your kids will experience when they start losing attention. They don't recognize that, but they have the capability of being able to recognize that. Whether it's the knee starts shaking, whether they are finding themselves drifting off, whether they are fidgeting and they've got the fingers moving, whether they're allowing themselves to go down some tangent road, we can bring this to conscious attention. And we can get those kids then to say, I need a break. Now, in the kind of setting we have all kinds of options, but a break can simply be, at somewhere between 20 minutes and 20 to 25 minutes. I know this kid's going to need to ask me for a bathroom break, and we're going to have a discussion about making sure that you ask me for a bathroom break, because if you don't take that bathroom break, you will lose the last 15 minutes of this class. So I need you to actually tell me I need to go to the bathroom, and I will let you go, okay? Or I'm going to hand somebody, I need this note to go to the principal, okay, and I need you to be back in 5 minutes, all right? For those 3 minutes, so those 3 or 4 minutes you lose, you will get the last 15. You have a very real possibility of getting the last 15. If you don't give it to them, they lose the last 20. So it's a time cost thing. But they literally need, once they recognize the physical symptoms of their restlessness, They need to be able to call on you and say, I need a break, and hopefully what you've done is you've worked out some kind of system or some kind of relief, motoric relief for that student that allows them not to be embarrassed in front of their peers, but to take that motoric break that they actually need. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about advice or suggestions in doing that in like a gen ed classroom. So when you have, your self-contained sped classroom and you've got the support and the help and the aides, and you're watching for those things, that's great. In a classroom where, right, I write a combination in that, allow for student breaks. And in our 5-6 classrooms, it's wonderful. Our teachers actually, that's part of their practice. We are taking a break. Everyone is taking a 3-minute break, and we're back. In our 7-8 classrooms, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. Our teachers are like, what? I'm talking about. We're 7 grade graders. We don't do that. And getting that student, like the teaching moments, how does that happen? And how do you see that happen where we can hand that baton to the student and say, remember how in that class, in 5th grade, we gave it to you. I need you to now say, I'm going to do this for myself. Right. So that self-reflection piece, I'm just curious.
It's a teaching. It's actually, it's a teaching process. Okay, the whole raising self-awareness and then what do you do to take care of yourself it has got to be directed teaching. Now, I'm lucky because I've got 3 people dealing with 12 kids, and we actually focus on that. I think it's worth the investment because if you can figure that out like early in a semester or early in the year, and how are we going to communicate, and how are you going to take a break, and how am I going to know that you actually need a break versus you're bored and you want to get out of my classroom, right? Okay, so that's why the recognition of what are the restless features, okay, so that you know what to look for, and now you want the youngster to look for it, and then what's the break that gets you back here in 3, 4, 5 minutes at most. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to make that? And then the last part of that is teaching the kids, like, what do you need to do during your break to allow yourself to come back down? Is it deep breaths? Are you going to put your headphones on as you go to the office? What is it going to work? Now, we need to let kids actually play a part of this plan making with the expectation that, okay, here's what I need. You're going to come back to class and you're going to be able to re-engage. If you can't re-engage, that plan isn't working. Okay, we're going to do things that will try to help you, but I am not going to foster you doing escaping behavior from me. Okay, that's not going to work. So when we figure out how you take a break, whether it's based on predetermined time or after you've done your direct instruction before they go into the independent part of your lesson or whatever it is, I need you to come back from whatever break that is ready to re-engage. That's how I'm going to know that you're taking a functional break. Okay, and if it doesn't work, and now again, I'm lucky. So they go up to the therapist, they develop a new plan. The therapist tells the behaviorist in the classroom, here's his new plan. We try out the new plan. Does it work? Yeah, it does, or no, it doesn't. It's not working. They're really not coming back ready to engage. Back up to the therapist, new plan. And we do it until they get a plan. Yeah.
How long should that plan take action for? A week, 2, 3? How long do you guys do?
Okay, so again, I'm going to go back. ADHD is a lifelong neurological condition. So you may not eliminate it. You're going to work on it. Gradually, you're going to lengthen the time between breaks. Okay, now I have severe ADHD kids, so some of them are taking 2 breaks or 3 breaks when they first get to EBC every period for 3 minutes. They're not getting all the instructional time they need, but that's what their threshold and their tolerance of attention is. And one of our jobs is to extend that so we reduce the frequency of the breaks and the duration of them, okay? Yeah.
How long do you test, you're talking about going back and having new plans brought in, but I guess how long are you giving someone?
Strike three 3 times. If you come back and you're not, that plan isn't working. And if they come back and they're really dysregulated after the first time, that's not working. Okay, that clearly is not. And we have kids, for example, that can go out and do 3 minutes of swinging on the swings and come back and be perfectly Okay, and then I get a new kid who says, oh, that looks like a good idea, and they go out and swing and they come back and woo, they come into the classroom and that doesn't work for you. Okay, that's not working. So you have to, I mean, it calls upon tremendous creativity to try to give, what are the parameters you're willing to give in terms of breaks, okay? And I know you are more restricted actually than I am, because I got staff who can supervise to see how these functional breaks are working in a class, where I know you folks don't have the same opportunities. But a lot of that is, if it's a functional break, you are honestly trying to get yourself back to a teachable situation. So this is what my expectation is.
How do you communicate with the rest of the class about the breaks?
There's a quick lesson on fairness and fairness. How many of you are in middle school? Most of you? Okay, so middle school kids have an erroneous sense of what fair is. Fairness is sameness, okay? That's not true. Fairness is getting what you need when you need it, okay? So you need a break and she doesn't. If she needs something, I'm going to make sure she gets what she needs, but it won't be the same thing that you get. The most absurd one is, here's the most absurd one that identifies it. Let's say this young lady here, God forbid, all of a sudden falls on the floor and she has had a heart attack. I know CPR, okay? But you know, if I'm going to give CPR to you, then I actually need to give it to everybody else. So I don't think I'm going to do that. See, that's absurd, right? But that's how kids think. And you can actually awaken them to the ridiculousness of fairness being sameness by giving them that story, because they'll all go, that's stupid. Well, okay, so she gets a break, you all don't get a break, okay? It's like, just like CPR. I was like, no, she needs one.
I've had a wonderful speech and language pathologist who, working on executive functioning, kind of going into that thread, uses glasses. So for the younger kids, they really, and I've kept that and I've used that, something that I've picked up, the idea of, let's take a look at the room, who's wearing glasses, who doesn't, you know, why don't you wear glasses, or why are you wearing glasses, and using that as a, you know, your eyes need glasses, your eyes don't need glasses. So your body needs the break. And
it would be unfair for me to say, well, you're the only one with glasses on right now, so please take them off, because it's not fair for you to have glasses on. Right? I mean, you literally use the absurdity of it, because kids need to get over that. Yep.
So let's say I do have scheduled breaks in my classroom, and my student with ADHD needs a break, or is just exhibiting symptoms of needing a break, like 7 minutes before the scheduled break. He knows the scheduled break is coming. Is it worth it for me to say, can you wait 7 minutes?
No.
Just let the student go.
You're going to say, you know what, I know you need a break now. We need to figure out a way that you can attend for 7 more minutes. So we're going to set a plan to extend this time. Okay? It's not instantaneous, right? But you have to make the expectation. Like, I need to get you to the point, and you need to, in order to be involved in instruction, so you're here for 7 more minutes. Because you're going to miss some instructional time. So this break is going to be a stretch break right outside the door for a minute, and you come back, because then you can last 6 more. Okay? It does not have to be the full blown. And incidentally, I don't think it's a bad thing for everybody to take a break. I think a 50-minute period is a really long time. See, I should have given you a break already, which I do in San Jose State. I don't know why I'm going droning on here. But yeah, I mean, so 3-hour classes, right? You all been to college and had 3-hour, I mean, you think about that, you go, who attends for 3 hours? One year, they had me teach Saturdays from literally 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock. That's so people could fit it in. And I knew after lunch, nobody, and these were conscientious, motivated young professionals, but boy, they were blown out by that time, and they had no more room for what I had to say. But I wouldn't diagnose them as having ADHD. I mean, that's just, everybody has a threshold of attentiveness. Everybody does. So some instructional strategies for holding attention, okay? Obviously, activities with movement. And let me just give you a generalization, because obviously most of your impulsive, hyperactive ADHD kids are going to be boys more than girls. And boys are visual motor creatures. We are visual motor creatures. We are not auditory processors. We are terrible at that. But we are pretty good at visual motor activities. Okay, so if you can supplant your activities with visual motor things, you are likely to keep your boys engaged more. Obviously, relevancy, I'm not going to say. So, you know, one of the things you can do if you want to buy a couple more minutes is when you park yourself like next to a person like this person is going to pay attention to me. I know she's going to be paying very good attention to me during this brief moment. But physical proximity is actually quite effective. It's not sustainable, but if you do it, you can actually get kids to sort of restart themselves, at least for a short period of time, okay? As opposed to being way back here where I know the back row people can go sound asleep and think about other things and I won't even know it. Familiarity, novelty, okay? These are all kinds of things to create suspense, create conflict. These are all things, and you know where it's so interesting where this list comes from. You know where this list comes from? It comes from video games. It comes right from video games, because this is what actually gets kids attending. Conflict, suspense, novelty, humor, okay? That actually generates a lot of interest for them. Now, and I know you don't do this, but I'm just going to say it because in my generation, this is the way it worked. Textbooks do not generate novelty, suspense, humor, relevance, or anything like that. They just don't. They're dry. They are dull, and they are going to diminish kids with ADHD's motivation and attention, okay, if you work out of them. How many of you are familiar with universal design for learning? Okay, so this is a whole nother course, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, I really strongly suggest that you get onto the website. But let me just do a quick thing about UDL. Okay, first of all, I'm going to say it's not a panacea. It does not solve everything. But here's what it does. It actually encourages teachers to find alternative and multiple ways of presenting information and of important information they want kids to have. Multiple modes of presenting information to kids that they, especially around concepts that they really want them to learn. That's number one. Number two, universal design strongly encourages teachers to allow and find multiple modes of student response. Multiple modes of student response. So, think of all the different ways kids can respond to show you what they know. Part of that response is, instead of 20 miles wide and 2 inches deep, it actually encourages teachers to say, let's specialize in something in that unit and let that youngster go down that part that deep in an area of interest and then teach it to the rest of the class. So everybody's getting to be a specialist in something that actually in that topic unit they find more interesting than the areas that they don't. The third part of UDL, really quickly, is to create multiple environments that will engage kids in learning. To create multiple settings, to create multiple environments, activities, whatever it is, specifically to motivate and engage kids in what you want them to do. So instead of one size, instead of one way, instead of doing it, to teach to the middle, it actually encourages you to allow and do multiple modes of presentation, multiple modes of student response, and multiple modes of setting up your classroom environment. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to get more in depth to that, but it actually is designed to free teachers up from feeling so constrained by textbooks and essays. Okay, that's obvious. That's really the purpose of it. All right, front load and time limit expectations when the task you're assigning is going to be dull, boring, and repetitive. Okay, so let's take math for a second. Math calculation. Okay, those kind of worksheets. Figure out what the minimum number of problems that they have to show, that they have to do, that convince you that they've mastered the concept, okay? I bet it's not 40. I bet it's not 30. It may not even be 20, and it might be 10. Because the more you can get through the null, mundane, and boring things, then you move on to something else. Okay? So you want to do things that you know are not going to be interesting to kids, but they have important feedback, is minimize those as much as you can in terms of getting feedback. If you are an English teacher and you have a rubric, and maybe this is much better, I'm going to admit that I'm not as in tuned on this, but you've set up your rubric so you know what the outcome is going to be. Why would you assign it? Why would you put the number of pages? Okay, so we used to be given, I need a 20-page history paper on some topic. Like, and who came up with 20 pages? You know, I can remember in college, I was trying to figure out how many quotes, how many times did I have to take a quotation out of a history book in order to make 20 pages, right? So instead of the volume, look at the outcome, okay? And again, you're dealing with generations that are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They're quick, right? Quick, short, brief. One of the funny things is I see reports all the time, psychoeducational testing, and some of them are like 60 pages. How many of you think I read all 60 pages? Ever? Ever? Right, you're all correct. See, that's 100%. See, I know you know, right? No. So volume shouldn't be like this thing that actually, and it's counterproductive for our ADHD kids. Catch them doing right and immediately reinforce them because they can't self-reinforce. They don't know. They really actually don't know when they're doing right. And certainly, I like the way you raised your hand.
Is that frontal, like, because I can't remember?
Yes, and I'm going to get so that's executive function, but I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to touch that just so they can't understand. They don't know when they're doing right. They sure know what it's telling wrong because you know what? They get feedback when they do wrong, but nobody gives them feedback when they're doing right. So put it in the front of your front lobes right here. Make sure you catch them doing right. They literally, they don't. We have a checkout system. At the end of the day, every youngster has to tell us of an accomplishment and a challenge they've overcome. And you know what happens? With all the therapy they get like 4 hours a week, the one thing that changes their inner voice is having to articulate what they did right and what they accomplished and what they got over, well, the challenge that they overcame. It changes their whole self-perception. Okay, provide an incentivizing extrinsic reward. I know sometimes people go, I don't like giving extrinsic rewards. Well, how many of you would be in teaching if you didn't get a paycheck? Okay, that's an extrinsic reward, I hate to tell you. When you do a good job, you get more money and bigger checks, right? But that's an extrinsic reward. So extrinsic rewards are not inherently bad. They're not inherently bad. And for ADHD kids who are not intrinsically able to self-reinforce, they need extrinsic reinforcements. You have to understand, and again, I'm going to describe this, that ADHD kids are going to make the same mistake. They are going to make the same mistake because they live in the moment. And when the moment's gone, everything goes with it. So no matter how you dealt with this situation today, tomorrow, it's a brand new silo and a brand new experience, and you never told me that before. I didn't know you wanted that. Okay? Understand there's going to be repeats because one of the learning problems that ADHD kids have is making associations and seeing how something leads to something else. Which is why when we talk about front-loading expectations and the consequences that they get, it's really important. It's an important teaching tool. A gets you B, C gets you D, and then enforce it, just as they did. Incidentally, ADHD kids can sometimes feel powerless, and when you give A, B, C, D, they have to make a choice. The choice is theirs. You just have to make sure you do B and D, whichever choice they make. Okay, that's how to teach them to make associations. And that will, in fact, begin to mitigate this kind of idea that what happened right now is all that happened. And then to whatever happened tomorrow or next week is an entirely different experience that I've never seen before. Target your disruptive and inappropriate behaviors and try to go, try to ignore some of the annoying ones, at least at the outset if you can. Now, anything that disrupts anybody around them needs to be attended to. If it's self-distracting and not distracting anybody else, put that on a lower list. Okay? So you're preserving the learning environment, a conducive learning environment first, and then you're worrying about the individual. Okay, I'm going to go quickly through. We've talked about breaks. We talked about visual motor. Assign the seats that best allows you to observe and signal, which doesn't necessarily mean the front. So preferential seating, you should be in control. That's up to your discretion. We have ADHD kids in the back because if they're too close to everybody else, they're going to interrupt with somebody. We put kids right next to the behaviorist in the classroom because they need to be cued. And that physical proximity is going to help them modulate a little bit more. And we have kids who are in the front because they really need to focus on the lesson. So preferential seating is depending upon how you determine it. All right, I kind of want to go into this last thing. So here's the script that we use with our ADHD kids that we've found pretty effective. So remember we talked about accomplishments? And we have each kid describe an accomplishment and a challenge that they've overcome. So we've got the opportunity, and we do a lot of monitoring here, but we actually see and look at kids' strengths, attributes, and recent accomplishments. So our script always begins with something like, I really appreciate how much you've been trying lately, or how much your attention's gone from 5 minutes to 8 minutes. Now, this is when we're going to discipline them. So now the second part, but we always start, and if you think about the reports you write, don't you want to always start with a strength, or your parent conference? You always want to start with something that they're positive, so it's more palatable. Same thing with ADHD kids. So now you're going to state the problem behavior and the consequences because of the choice the student made. All right, and that's why they're getting it. And then, and really important is you're going to finish the interaction with the optimistic belief that we're going to resolve this, I believe we're going to get past this. Because you see, when we don't do that, then we leave the kid feeling you're just a bad kid. Here we go again. I'm disciplining you again. And positive behavior teaching allows us to, in fact, execute the consequences, but advocate for the youngster. Okay, do you see that? You see how that changes the feeling of it? I think I have a sample up here. Billy's been doing better lately on staying in his seat and not calling out. He was averaging 4 times out of his seat and 5 call-outs per class before a behavior plan was put into place. Now it's down to 1 time of his seat per period with only 2 call-outs. Today, however, Billy's been roaming around the room disrupting other students working, and when asked to get away, has responded with demeaning remarks which he has directed to each classmate. After 2 reminders and a warning, just this period, Billy engages negatively with yet another peer who doesn't even sit near him. You've had it. You've had it, okay? You've had it with him on this day. So what I want you to think about is you go back here. That script up there is how we want to intervene here. When you take this home and you think about how you could use this process of scripting in order to deal with this particular problem, a very typical kind of ADHD problem. Okay, lastly, I want to just give you an idea. So we use a bunch of C's here over at EBC. Calmness, to minimize overstimulation. Check-ins, to have the kid assess their physical and emotional state. So we sometimes check in right during the class. We may come up and say, so you're fidgeting a little bit. How are you actually feeling, right? And it's like, oh, was I fidgeting? Yeah, and I'm in proximity, so I'm going to find out if I can actually correct it right now or whether this youngster really needs a break. Consistency in routines, coping skills, which are functional breaks, your closed-ended choices that we talked about, A plus B, A equals B, C equals D. Connectedness and a sense of belonging. Your kids, ADHD kids so often get neglected or shunned from groups, and they hate that. It makes them, we're going to lead to other pathologies, so find connectedness. Every ADHD kid that I've ever met has attributes and talents and interests that we can work on. And if you can find other people so they feel a sense of connectedness and feel a sense of belongingness in a community, then again, you're going to see much less of the intensity and frequency of ADHD symptoms. Collaborate with home, and classwork gets segmented and, if necessary, cut or reduced in order to get it completed. Okay, because completion is something we're seeking with ADHD kids. Successful completion. We've talked about all this. You've been a tremendous audience, and I will take any last questions.
Have you ever met any parents who refuse to let their children be diagnosed with ADHD out of fear of stigma?
I have dealt with many parents who are reluctant to follow what I would consider the prescription. The best practice is a combination of medication, positive behavior teaching plan, and then consistency and routine. It doesn't even include psychotherapy. That's not actually one of the best practices for these kids. But a positive behavior plan, consistency and routine, and medication. And I have had many parents not be able to follow through on that. And their kids don't get better. They don't function very much better in a classroom. And they certainly don't generalize the ability to be able to be self-aware of their physical and emotional state and be able to take care of themselves and re-engage in class. They don't generalize that outside of EBC.
So I'm a counselor actually.
Okay?
I heard through my classes that trauma responses, students have a history of trauma, especially complex trauma, can have pretty much the same symptoms as ADHD. And I'm wondering whether or not they're diagnosed or, would we just do the same strategies?
I think it came in later. We talked about right at the outset that there are so many components that lead to attention challenges, okay? And in fact, my experience at Esther B. Clark School has been more often than not, there is at least a comorbid condition, and in most cases that other condition is the primary condition, and the attentional is actually the secondary.
So trying to treat that other, obviously,
Is the priority.
using these in the classroom.
Some of them, yeah. I mean, so obviously, in addition to stimulation, we lower the stresses like crazy. The cognitive profiles that we have at EBC are fascinating. The verbal comprehension, since you're a counselor, the verbal comprehensions and the visual spatial reasoning are usually above average to superior, and their processing speed and working memories are low average to borderline. And so you've got a kid who's thinking at one level and producing at a terrible other level. It's ridiculous to think that those kids wouldn't have a sense of anxiety or that wouldn't cause emotional stress. It's just ridiculous to think it would be any different. But they don't attend well, right? And they have limitations of attention. Yes?
Do you have a good book that you could recommend for parents that really talks about structures and how to set the structure, be consistent? Because so many times I want to say all these
Yeah.
things to them, like, hey, this is a great resource, or
So unfortunately, I'm such a technician that I'm a Russell Barkley guy, and Russell Barkley is particularly, so I think if you go to Russell Barkley, you will find parent resources under his name. For a professional, he's like the guru. I mean, he's spent his whole life on ADHD. And my bet is if you go to his website or you look at one of his books, he'll have a bibliography for parents. And then, of course, there's the organization called CHAD, Children with I used to call it Children with ADD. That is a parent-run organization and a support group for kids for their offspring who have attentional deficit disorders. CHAD, CHADD. Yep.
you were talking that you have a toolbox of things that
Yeah.
work with your kids for vision. What are some of those things, if you don't mind that, Nya?
Sure. So we have mints. Okay, so they're sucking on something. There's things you fit in your palm that you have spiky, slimy. We have things that smell. So we're actually hitting the senses as much as we can. So tactile, olfactory. They've got to be quiet though. There's nothing that makes any noise. So they're all rubber or something like that. There are things that they can spin, like in their hand. We do have the round balls for some of the kids, the ball chairs. We have standing desks. In fact, some of our kids have 2 desks. They have the sitting desk and they have the standing desk, and we allow them to switch between each other. And sometimes just getting up and getting to the standing desk or sitting back down is enough for them to recalibrate. What else do we have in there?
We have snowball, the one you flip it over and then the snow will falling down.
These are pretty much this big, and they sit and they can actually bounce a little bit up and down while they're trying to listen to you.
Are you talking about a fidget?
Yeah.
Oh, fidget. Oh, yeah. No, I've got squishy balls and slime balls, spiky balls.
The visual one.
They usually take away, I use the visual ones for calming.
Oh, yeah, for calming.
But if any, like the ones that have like the oil and water and flip it and then like
Over
it
it, over.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah.
Like a little mini,
Little
there's lamps, there's a lava lamp.
Yeah, lava. Yeah.
So those I've found are super helpful when you've got someone who's, they've got more of that emotional piece. And I'm like, here, go flip this 10 times and then come back and talk to me. And they come back and they're still kind of like, oh, go flip this 10 more times.
10 more.
They come back.
Okay, now I can talk to you.
Right. But for that intensive piece, not.
I know. Yeah.
No, there's a lot of sitting and watching. They're like, what did you say about math? Yeah.
Or when you see all the focus going into the fidget, then obviously there's a simple way to do it, because I've been bamboozled by this many times, including also material organization. So all you have to do is ask the youngster a question. Okay, if they can answer the question, then guess what? They're good. Okay, they may not have the position that you want, but as long as they're not disrupting somebody else, and even if they're doing this, if they can answer your question. I mean, Dr. Elliott, he's great at that. I mean, he'll be playing a game on his phone, and you think, you're not even listening to me. But he's carrying on this conversation, and that's how he focuses. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but again, if you're getting the outcome you want, who are we to argue with the process? In fact, if you take it away, they may not be able to function as well, right? So, okay, yeah.
So
Sure.
are you finding, can you remind me the grade levels that you're
So we have everything from 3 to 10.
3 to 10?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, sometimes, you think, oh, these kids are older, they're not going to respond to these types of these strategies.
Yes.
But do you find, due to the nature of ADHD being a neurological issue?
So the breaks they take are different. The little kids are more likely to get out and do something pretty rigorous, like they'll get their motors moving a lot, right? That's probably grade 3 through maybe 6, 5. And then as you get higher, you see kids doing things like they just want to play a couple of songs on their headphones, or they will take out a book that gives them pleasure, or they'll do some drawing, or some of them even do journaling if they don't have a written language expressing. So they do that for a few minutes, and then they're reset and they can come back in. The manifestation of those breaks is different as they mature.
I feel like they start to feel more of the stigma, and it's difficult
Yes.
to get the older kids, especially if they've been identified
Right.
formally
Yes.
a little bit later.
Yeah.
They have this they don't want your strategy.
Yeah, well, and they also don't want to use the accommodations that they're entitled to, and that's a real problem. We didn't get to that, but that's when they have accommodations on their IEP, they're entitled to that, and it's across the curriculum. But if they don't use them, and then they get into trouble because they're not attending, you have to say, well, again, you're making a choice. Do you understand you are entitled to this? But if you choose not to use them, you're going to receive the natural consequences.
A little bit of the can't versus
Yeah.
the will.
Yeah, but it's again, it abates in high school. So you folks are in middle school. That's the worst time, because conformity and being not sticking out is at its premium. Okay, and then as they get into 10th grade and continue, diversity and individuality actually come back in.
Do you see that happen in your school?
Our 10th graders are well, and I remember. There's no stigma in my class because everybody got the same problem. So everybody goes out to therapy, everybody takes a break, everybody's got their own, and so it's a little bit of an artificial environment, but I will tell you that even in that environment, one of the hardest challenges we have is getting kids to advocate and use the accommodations they're entitled to.
I just love hearing you say that, because then I
Yeah.
just walk away from it like, okay,
I know. Like, we have a prescription for you. Why won't you use that? Yeah, that's our big, if I can figure that out, I will make $1 million. And I need $1 million to retire out here. Yeah. Thank you all for coming.